how do we abide?
Keep my commandments.
Sorry, what?
My commandments.
Keep commandments, okay. And what commandment specifically does he talk about here?
To love one another.
Good, okay. I know, we're like back in elementary school. Okay. Okay, and I think I could do a whole other seminar, or you could do a whole other seminar on what it means to love one another and what it means actually to keep the commandments that Jesus talked about in the Gospels. And I think actually I'm going to give you a passage at the end. I think the kingdom of God is actually a really important theme and priority in Jesus' teachings. That's, again, a whole other seminar. So I'm going to talk about bearing fruit and abiding, which is also Jesus' words, abiding in you. So I think the clearest one to me in this passage comes out is actually loving each other. That seems to be a good basis for maybe all the rest of the priorities that you might have. And that's summarized, love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those seem to be good priorities to kind of keep in mind in general about if you want to set your priorities. That's kind of where you start, I think. But that's actually not very helpful to someone like me in particular. I actually need lots of specifics. My husband's very big picture. He likes to think about theoretical things, and that's great because we need people to do that, but I need specifics. So I actually think that one of the ways to actually be more fruitful and to do more by doing less is to think about how you use your time. And I think time is something that God gives everybody. It's like an equalizer. Everybody has the same amount, theoretically speaking. I mean, if you die earlier, you don't have as much time. But this week, we all have the same amount. From Sunday till today, at least to this moment right now, we all have had the same amount of time. Do you know how many hours there are in a week? There are 100. Huh? Yeah, 168. Did you do that in your head? All right, 168 hours. And I think I've heard people talk about this, about time in terms of, it's kind of like money. I mean, at our church, we're actually talking right now about what it looks like to budget not only your finances, but also your time and your other resources. And they're talking about what would it look like if each member tithed to the church. I thought that was scary because that's like 17 hours, but it was food for thought, So what do you do with, your 168 hours in a week? And I think you start out, just like you do with a budget. If you want to figure out a monetary budget, you keep track of your expenses, say for a month or a week, and see where all your money goes. And I think in the same way, if you want to get a hold of a handle on your time, this is actually a little intense, but I tried it, and it actually is a little bit scary. You break up your day into 15-minute increments, and then for each of the 15 minutes, you write down what you've done. So, for this thing, I would have said, I got here and I set up the easel, and I used the restroom, and I wandered around looking kind of dorky. But I enjoyed that. That was fine. But that would be, one 15-minute block. And then the next 15 minutes, I sat and I wrote stuff down. So, or this morning, I woke up and I fed my daughter, and then I got her dressed. That type of thing. So you keep track. And I think you'll be surprised at where your time goes. In particular, things like email. There's a theme in my life here. Email and the internet. Sleep. Commuting. Hygiene. That is an important one. Whatever, chores. I think as you get older, these things increase, things like chores, other things increase. And the final thing, margin. So I said, if you want to get serious about getting control of your time, these are things to take into account as well. So you'd write all these things down on your schedule, and then at the end of the week, you would look at where your time has gone, and you would also look at your priorities, as you know them to be, and you'd figure out if your priorities match up with the amount of time. And I mean, I think there are basic things like sleep that you need to do and eating that you need to do, but apart from that, I mean, at least in your waking hours, do your priorities match up? And I think when I did it, I found that my priorities didn't really match up. I spent a lot of time on the computer that I didn't necessarily need to be doing, and I spent time reading that I didn't think about. Like, there's just extra time I spent doing things that I just didn't even know that I was doing. Okay, from here, you can, this is what you do with a monetary budget too, you go from there and you figure out, well, where would you like your money to go? So you say, where would you like your time to go? What is God calling you to do with the time that you've been given? And you make a time budget. And I am a very structured person, so I actually at one point did, okay, to tell you how old school I am, this is random. Lawrence mentioned there would be an overhead, and I'm embarrassed to say that I thought it would be like an overhead projector, so I brought overheads. And I realized there's no overhead projector, that's not what they're talking about. So fortunately, Brian and Jennifer had a flip chart, and so I didn't have to spend more scrambling. But I have a spreadsheet that I used, and I'm supposed to have this out, so I don't know what I did with it. But at any rate, I'll just try it. There's on the top, there's 168 hours. I did this in like Excel. And then I wrote the categories of things on the side over here, like sleep, eating, okay, etc. And then it's pretty easy to do. You drag and drop, but you start off with this. So I need about 8 hours of sleep. So I did 8 times 7 equals 56. And so this was subtracted from here, and it came over here in this column, which I guess is 1. Is that right? Okay. And I figured out how many hours I was budgeting, allocating, and I tweaked the numbers until I didn't get a negative number down at the bottom. So that was a little bit scary because I was like, oh, I really need to eat, I need to sleep, but this only gives me like 1 hour to spend with my kids, or, I mean, this was before I had kids actually. But, and I found that something helpful to also include in this was margin, and what I mean by margin is time for when your schedule gets interrupted by something. I like to call it sometimes God's interruptions. Like if a friend drops by unexpectedly, or if something happens, like crisis or something, or you realize you've forgotten there's something you're supposed to do. Margin is really good for keeping on top of the things that God has called you to do, so that the other areas of your life don't suffer. Like for instance, I've noticed that my husband is an introvert, and if we spend a lot of time on a weekend, say, with friends or family, and he doesn't get enough alone time, then eventually at some point he just crashes, like the blue screen of, oh, you probably don't know about that. There used to be the blue screen of death on the computers, and he just shuts down. So we try to keep in mind when we make plans that he's going to need some time to decompress, especially when he's around an extrovert like me and our 2 little kids who are also, I think, extroverts. so he doesn't suffer too much, and he doesn't just shut down. And that's kind of an extreme example, but that's the sort of thing I mean to include margin. So it's for just downtime, but then also for the unexpected things in life. And I'm also very structured, but I had students who are very, they like to keep all their options open and didn't like to make commitments to stuff. So when we did this, after you do this, I have you fill out like I get another sheet where you have your schedule, you plan your schedule out. I do it in like half-hour increments, but some people could do an hour or whatever. You have the days of the week, like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You have the time, like 6 o'clock for us, 6:30, etc., all the way down. Again, you could use Excel for that. And you figure out on a normal week, what would your week look like, and what would you do, and where do things go? And for someone like me, that helps because if something unexpected comes up, I know I can shift things around, or it just gives me more freedom to work with. But if you don't like that, you can at least go back to the 168 hours because you know where your time is going, and you can shift around those things. You know, like if you go grocery shopping and you have a budget and you say, I need to spend $125 a week, or I can only spend $125 this week. It's kind of like for a given type of activity, like hanging out or being on email or whatever, you know that this week I'm only supposed to be spending this much time, or I'm going to run into the other areas, or I'm going to take away from other areas. I think that's the one, the main